you just bring the word, Lord, and that we really get just a revelation of you through this class, Lord, and what you're doing in the lives of preteens. So I pray this in Jesus' name.
Amen. All right. So, a little bit of recap over the last 2 sessions. We talked a lot about socialization. Did you guys I wanted to make sure that you guys understood the difference between a mentor and a spiritual parent. Did you guys get that distinction? Did that clear up some confusion regarding that subject? One particular friend I had, she had a friend from the state that she was living at come to Bible school, and then there was another student that was her peer, and then she automatically, without the guy even knowing, this friend's son, she was just like, hey, will you be his spiritual father? And he's this 21-year-old student, yeah, sure, not really knowing anything, and just created a lot of confusion, a lot of mess. That's why I wanted to make sure that you guys understood those nuances, those differences, so that you don't fall into some of those different messes that we find ourselves in. Just let you guys know for the rest of the semester how it's going to play out. Today we are going to specifically talk about how to develop your preteen ministry, how do you do Sunday services, how do you do virtual, since COVID has given us a little bit of a curveball in ministry. How do you do parties? How do you do just the weekly, monthly ministry type stuff? Then on Thursday, I asked you guys if you're comfortable. We're going to lessen the social restrictions a little bit. If you're not comfortable, you're welcome to observe. This isn't like a dictatorship. I'm not Hitler. I have a beard. So then next week, we will do some practicing. We'll have another day where we will loosen up the social restrictions a bit, but we're actually going to kind of practice as small groups how to lead a preteen ministry, because I want to get you guys some experience in getting you guys get your wheels turning, so that when you do your final project, which is you're going to develop your own preteen event, I want you guys to kind of work as a group next week in class and give you some kind of practical how-tos. We will do some teachings on how to teach, different learnings. We're going to talk about learning styles. If you don't know your learning style yet, that day you're going to learn your learning style. That way, in a typical semester like this, there's 8 different learning styles today, and I would typically make sure every learning style is touched upon in terms of each class. But due to the restrictions, we do the best with what we can. Then that final Tuesday before graduation, that'll be our last class, and we are actually going to have a preteen party in here. I'm going to host a Christmas preteen party for y'all. That will be our last class together. You guys good? Cool. I was like, I have to do something fun with this class. I was like, I gotta give you something. So we'll see how that works out. Anybody have any questions about kind of the rest of the semester? Go with the flow. Perfect. All right, so we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly events in one-to-one, small, medium, large-size groups. We're going to talk about how the mechanics of each of those work. We're going to get through as much of this today as possible. So let's first get virtual out of the way. With COVID, we went from about a youth group of about 12 and a children's ministry of about 15 to nothing. So how do you go as a minister, you're used to a certain standard, a certain expectation, and you go from that to and maybe you don't have the skill sets to do virtual. Fortunately, I had some skill sets, and we had actually, we were really blessed. A couple months before COVID hit, we had a young man who worked for this big videography company. And so he kind of jumped on board real quick and volunteered his time. And so we were, between me and him, he had the technical side, I had the creative side, and we actually produced 30-minute episodes for kids each week. If you want to check those out, that's Lighthouse Kids Midlothian, just so you can, if you wanted to get an idea of kind of what we did. And it started rough at first. We were like, okay, we're gonna see how this worked. We got this as big of a green screen as we thought we needed. We realized we needed a much bigger green screen. We had, poor lighting at first. We didn't have microphones at first. And so like the sound quality was just kind of like meh. But like I wrote a script, and we had actors, and there was this like treasure hunting theme, and we had pirates, and then we had like songs and teaching and memory verse, and then so we went to this treasure hunting theme for 4 weeks, and then we did this Wild West thing for 4 weeks where we had a friend who had horses, so we actually filmed our actors riding around on horses. Then the next session we did was Way of the Warrior. That's just really dear to my heart. And so we went to the Japanese gardens in San Antonio and like took over like their area to do filming. And so like little by little we got to know better, and you don't know what you don't know. And so part of that is like, if you're really good at this stuff, great. That's awesome. Some of us are like, I can barely take a video with my phone, and that's okay. But you gotta start somewhere. If it's taking a video with your phone, maybe it's, you are doing maybe a 5-minute Facebook devotional for your parents' Facebook pages that they can share with their kids. That's perfectly legitimate. But you want to do something. We had Zoom meetings. I don't personally like Microsoft Teams, but there's tons of other apps that you can use. Google Hangouts, WhatsApp. You can even Marco Polo each other. There's tons of different apps out there if you just do your research. We just did Zoom just because that seemed like the thing to do. And so we kept it under 60 minutes because honestly, have you ever been in a Zoom meeting that lasts more than 60 minutes? It's kind of cringy. And so especially with like preteens or teenagers whose attention spans like that, we got really creative. We did games on Zoom. Anybody here play Mafia before? We played Mafia on Zoom. We did Mad Libs on Zoom. We did a game called, we did Never Have I Ever on Zoom. Ever played Never Have I Ever? We're actually going to play Never Have I Ever on Thursday, just FYI. We're playing the violent version of Never Have I Ever, so just get... just consider your own safety. That's not my job. All right. So, but we did Zoom meetings. We would have like a devotional. We would have a song. We would have group discussion. But we just kept it within that 60-minute time frame. Sometimes, one of the teenagers, he wanted to get something off his chest. So then we were just like, what? It might have gone an extra 10, 15 minutes because we had just allowed that space. But in reality, Zoom is like a 40-minute time limit for free. So then we had to pay like a $15 a month subscription to Zoom to get that extra time. But for us, it was worth it during that season. And then we started meeting in person again. I think around July, we started meeting in person. But maybe your churches aren't meeting in person yet. And so what do you do? Maybe you have those Zoom meetings. Maybe you create a weekly web series like we did. Maybe you and your team meet up on Sunday morning and then you just film your service and then post it on YouTube the next day. Maybe you guys are really good behind the camera and you can do really short and funny TikTok Bible stories. Anybody see TikTok Bible stories?
Yeah.
I love those, man. They do some creative stuff on TikTok. And especially with preteens, TikTok is their jam. Now, obviously there's some controversy behind TikTok, and if you're against that, that's okay. I'm not forcing you to do anything against your own conscience. But we did with our youth one of the devotionals on the Bible app. Where basically we can't meet together and discuss this in person, but we can you do the app, and then there's a section at the end for everybody to kind of do a group chat of like what they learned in the Bible app. You can create a group chat amongst the volunteers and students. You can text and email your parents regularly. Like there's so many things you can do, is basically my point. You just have to get out of the mindset of like, I don't have that skill. Let me tell you what skills I did not have before I started KFN. I did not know how to build a website. I did not know how to edit a video. I did not know how to do graphic design. I didn't even have my first cell phone until 2012, people. Like, I was really late to cell phones. Then Facebook, I didn't get on Facebook till like maybe 2013, 2014. Because I was like, I hate Facebook. And like social media, like I didn't really get into social media until about 2 years ago when I published my first book. I was just like, I'm going to have to get into social media now. And so there were so many skills I just didn't have. And then I started KFN as assistant director. and Skip and I was just like, hey, you guys are in charge of your own marketing. I was just like, awesome, I have all these amazing ideas. I don't know how to execute any of them, but I have amazing ideas. And honestly, YouTube University is glorious. Everything you need to know about any of this stuff, you can find on a YouTube video. All right, and it's okay if it's a 5-minute video and you're like, play, rewind, play, rewind, play, rewind, play, rewind, until you get the stuff. But everything I learned was on YouTube, everything. I learned how to do graphic design on YouTube. I learned how to do video editing on YouTube. I learned how to do web design on YouTube. Like now I am, like people pay me to build their websites because like I am an active like web designer. And so I think over the last year I've built 4 websites for different organizations. But I started not knowing anything. And this was only skills I've learned since 2015 or 2016 when I became the assistant director of KFN. These aren't things I went to school for. These aren't things I got trained up in. I didn't have anybody mentoring me. Like, you don't know what you don't know, but then you got to educate yourself. And so even this year, we're like, okay, well, we don't really know the ins and outs of videography and green. This was like the first time we've used a green screen, and how do you work around that and light the shadows, so it minimizes the shadows. But even with virtual, you have to get into your mindset that you need some way to have personal communication. Because while all those things are important and doable, you can do your Zoom and you can have some connection there. You can do your web series and your youth, your preteens, your kids, they can see that and be entertained or touched. All these things, but at some point you need personal connection still. COVID has shifted our perspective to where we're so concerned about physical health that we're not really all that concerned about soul health. Like, alcoholism rates have skyrocketed. Suicide rates have skyrocketed. Like, people on medication for depression has skyrocketed. COVID's not the only thing that kills us in this world. You guys understand that? In fact, you're more likely to die in a car accident on the freeway than you are to die of COVID. But it doesn't mean we stop driving our cars. So things that we did to make sure that we kept up that personal communication, we would invite families over for dinner. Now, my approach, and this doesn't have to be your approach, but my approach and the approach of my wife, we said, okay, we're going to follow state guidelines or county guidelines. And within that parameter, we're going to exploit every single loophole that we can. All right, so they said, churches can't meet in groups of larger than 10. Okay, well, there's me, my wife, and my son. So we can invite a family up to the size of 7 at our house for dinner. And so, like, once a week or twice a week, we were having, like, dinners regularly. Just because we're like, we can't meet you in a church setting, but there still needs to be that personal connection that takes place. You could do a drive-by. Using your spiritual Uzi of encouragement to pump families full of blessing bullets. Pat, 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 pat. If you don't know what a drive-by is, I'm sorry you haven't been at Oak Cliff long enough, I guess. But honestly, there's times when like people have like drive-by birthdays where like, you know, we had a kid in our church who was turning 5 and went outside this house, and all these people, even including people from like the police department, would like drive by and say, "Hey, happy birthday!" and that really blesses people. Bring gifts to their house, like knock on their door, step back, you know, that 6 feet distance, and leave your gift on the doorstep. And like they open the door and you can have like a little chat for a little bit. Socially distanced holiday celebrations. For Easter, here's what we did. We took our team, and so at the time, my wife and I were the children's pastors. I only became youth pastor back in August. So during Easter, what we did, we took about 3 or 4 guys with us in our Kia Sorrento, and we had Easter eggs. And so we would go and hide Easter eggs in people's yards, knock on their door, tell them how many Easter eggs are in their yard, and then they can go search out for eggs. And then in that card was a gift card to like our coffee shop so that the parents could have a special blessing for themselves as well. And like I can't tell you like how many times like the kids were just super excited. I haven't seen you in 4 weeks or whatever, and they're just super excited. So do whatever you can to get that connection. If COVID has taught us anything, it's taught us how to get creative. Creativity is a wonderful thing. God is a creative God, and I believe that one of the ways that we exhibit his character is through our creative processes. So, Ray, as a show of hands, how many of y'all's churches are still like meeting online? You're not meeting in person yet. So everybody's churches are meeting in person? Yes?
Yes.
Cool. Now, as a show of hands, how many of you are actively engaged in like kids, preteens, or youth ministry? A few of you? Perfect. How many of you are like wanting to start something? Like the semester's over, and it's like, I have the tools to start something. Perfect. So now that we have virtual out of the way, I want to talk to you about what it would look like to build your ministries, the best use of your time. And we're going to talk about this in the sense of if you have 60 minutes with your group, 90 minutes with your group, 120 minutes with your group, or if you're one of those crazy Pentecostal churches and your services last for hours on end, what do you do in those situations? I've been to some charismatic churches, it's like 5 hours, and you're just like, y'all don't know that y'all kids, right? All right, so let's talk about if you have an hour. Now, an hour, there's not a lot you can do in an hour. So you have to really maximize that time. And what I would start with is like 10 minutes of just pure fun. Group games, stage games, just something fun, because fun breaks down walls. Fun breaks down barriers. Fun is not just for the sake of being goofy. Now, I like being goofy as much as the next person. But the purpose of fun, there's an actual purpose to fun. There's some kids that, you know, if you're just like straight off the bat, just like, let's be spiritual. And then them kids will be like, you use fun to break down walls, to break down barriers. So 10 minutes of fun. Then you have your 5-minute intro that kind of segues between the fun and your worship. So you're like, hey, everybody, so glad you're here. We're going to pray over the service. And all those people that are having fun, they're directing their attention back to the front of the room, and it gets their minds focused. And then you can, like, maybe that's a time, if you're with kids or preteens, you can go over the rules, or that's a time that you pray over the service. And then, so that, don't make that any more than 5 minutes. That is not comedy hour at the Apollo, okay? I don't know how many times people are like trying to make this the intro or the prayer time. Well, it's like they're 5 minutes of fame and they're like going 20 minutes. I'm just like, you're eating up your time for no reason. Just no more than 5 minutes. Then 10 minutes of worship. That's 2 or 3 songs. 15 minutes of teaching. And then 10 minutes of altar or prayer ministry. And that's your hour. That's why, like, that 5 minutes, like, don't go over that. In fact, if you can, go under that. That time is just a transition time to get everybody focused at the front of the room. But the crucial thing is that you need to have at everything, you need a way to break down the barriers. You need a way to bring everybody's focus in. There has to be worship to the Lord. There has to be Bible teaching. And there has to be prayer. Those are like the essentials. And so no matter what your time limit is, make sure you get those essentials in. All right, so what if your church, and your most non-denominational church, is going to be about a 90-minute service? So again, you'll start with that 10 minutes of fun. You'll do your 5-minute intro. And now you have a little bit of time. So maybe you can have like 5 minutes of like a memory verse, a drama, a stage game, just something else like during that intro and prayer time, kind of an addition. And what we use that time for is like kind of prepping, giving you like a appetizer for the lesson. Whether that's your memory verse or your drama, and it can be really funny, it can be really goofy. Maybe you show your TikTok Bible story during that time. But there's tons of stuff. Like that would be like an appetizer to give them a taste of what to expect for the time together. Then you can increase your worship time. 15 minutes, 20 minutes of teaching time. You're increasing your teaching. 10 minutes of prayer time. Now there's some debate on whether or not you should have like a low amount of time for prayer ministry or this huge amount of time for prayer ministry. And next week, we're going to have a whole class devoted to prayer ministry and evangelism with preteens. So I'm going to address that topic next week. So 10 minutes prayer, and then you have this, because you have 90 minutes now you can have a small group time. Now, if you are one of those churches where you only have 3 to 8 kids, like your ministry is a small group. So I wouldn't break out into small groups. I would just, as a group, have discussion with your room. And so you have your prayer ministry and you break up into smaller groups. If you have like more than 9 kids or youth within your ministry. Does everybody understand that? Because the purpose of the small group is to get them to process what's been going on. You want to reinforce that lesson time. Like, what did God speak to them? A lot of times we talk about like head questions, heart questions, and feet questions. Like, what did you learn up here? How did it impact you here? And what are you going to do with the information when you leave this place? Those are good questions to ask during that time. And then end with a time of fun. You kind of bookends with fun so that, for them it's like, oh yeah, I came in on this really high note of fun and left on this really high note of fun. All right, so say you have 2 hours with them, all right? I would increase the fun time at the beginning to leave room for stragglers coming in. Have your 5-minute intro, have your 5-minute whatever memory verse, drama, stage game. Have your 15 minutes of worship, 20 minutes of teaching, or 10 minutes of prayer. Increase your small group time where they can process questions. And really we talked about how asking questions is a rabbinical style of teaching. And all of these really foster into learning styles that we're going to talk about in a couple weeks. Because you may have like a situation where I'm talking to you, you auditory learners, the ones that you learn just by listening, you're like, yes, I'm learning something. But then you learners that are like, you learn by touching, empirical learners, you guys are like, I hate the preteen ministry class because I haven't learned anything. My son hates math. Hated math all of his life. And because it was like worksheets and numbers and listening to the teacher talk and watching her do equations on the board, and he was just like, I know nothing about math. But now that he's in tech school and he's forced to use equations and math, it's different because he's actually working on a vehicle applying math with a purpose. And so because he's an empirical learner, he has to touch things in order to learn. And we're going to talk about that in a couple weeks. But so after your small group time, which a learning style is like some people learn by talking it out. That is a learning style. But then after that small group time, because you have just 2-hour time frame, have an interactive group activity. Let me give you an example. So we do this activity where we split the group up into teams, like basically they're small groups, and we do a competition. And we give them like popsicle sticks and tape and glue and all sorts of stuff, and we tell them to build a 3-foot bridge. Then at the end of like 10 minutes, we test everybody's bridge. We lay it on like 2 chairs, and then we put metal washers. We stack metal washers in the middle of it. And we test the integrities of their bridges. And whoever's bridge holds the most washers before it breaks wins. And so they have to get creative, and they have to learn team building, and they have to learn like, hey, the more that we talk about this, we're running out of time to actually build this thing. And so we would use that when we're talking about Jesus being the bridge between us and the Father. Yeah. That became an interactive group activity to reinforce the lesson that Jesus is our life bridge. You can even use that if you're talking about community. And you can ask questions afterwards. Hey, did you guys work well together? What were some of the challenges? And then they can discuss that, and then they realize, oh wow, this isn't just a one-man show. We have to work in a community. And so there's tons of stuff you can do that way, but that's a great time frame to have something interactive for those type of learners specifically. Then end with that fun. Again, high note on both ends of the service. Now, more than 2 hours, let me encourage you guys. All right, because I'm the type of person, I'm just like, I ain't going to show some VeggieTales in church. I'm just like, they get VeggieTales all day, every day. I'm not going to show no VeggieTales. I'm not going to show no YouTube. I'm going to try to provide content that they don't get on a regular basis. However, my disclaimer is, if your service runs more than 2 hours, bust out the VeggieTales. Bust out Toy Story, whatever. Just put on a movie, get some food and snacks, or if you're in a situation where the adults welcome the kids to come in on the ministry time, throw them into the river and see what happens. And you as the leader get to be their life jacket as they float down the stream. All right. So that's kind of on a weekly basis what it would kind of look like in different scenarios with different numbers of people. Now, I come from a mega church background. When I got saved, I was going to a 10,000 member church, and about a year after I got saved, my wife and I started volunteering with the kids, and one class. It was the first and second grade class. And we had 2 services, and at the early service, we had 75 kids, and at the late service, which had more attendance, we had about 150 kids. That's just first and second graders. That's just first and second graders. And then we moved to the 3rd and through 6th graders, where at the second service, we had up to 400 kids. On a Wednesday night, we'd still have 100 to 200 kids. And all of these apply. You just have to tweak at different times. Still have your small groups. If you're in a situation where you're at a really large church, like if you're at Gateway or something, or you're at Joel Osteen's church in Houston, you're in those type of situations, and you break up your group. Say you have like 8-year-old boys or 9-year-old boys. If you can break it up that much, that's awesome. Some of you are like, I have 20 kids. I can't break it up that much. That's fine. Maybe you just do boys, girls. Or maybe, you're a church that has like 5 kids, 5 preteens. Then that's your group. Don't break that up. Does anybody have any questions about that before I move forward? All right. So let's talk about, those are things you do on a weekly basis. Well, let's talk about things you would do on a monthly basis. All right, just to keep things fresh, to keep things moving forward, keep them fun, keep them light, keep them entertaining. So I really like theme days. Love theme days. And so here are some examples of things you can do. And what you would do is at the beginning, maybe you do it at the end of the month. So at the beginning of the month, you're really hyping up. You're like, hey, fourth Sunday, we're going to have this thing. So pajamas. Everybody wears pajamas. Just don't let anybody in there with their birthday suit on. All right. That's not an acceptable pajamas. All right. Another thing, superheroes. All right. You can do nerd night. For superheroes, did I tell you guys about my son's superhero story at youth? Did I tell you guys? Okay, let me tell you. I love this story. So he was like, we're having a superhero night at youth group, and he was, I think, 13 at the time. And so he's like, let's come up with a new superhero. And so we had this big long beard, like probably like down to here, and he had a fedora, and we had one of those blue man suits, the kind of skin tight, colorful suits, and it was all blue. So he put himself in his blue man suit. He put on the beard, put on the fedora. He had these shorts on, and he said, "I'm Beard Man." All right. So what we decided to do is on his chest, we made a symbol for him, BM. And for those of you that don't find the humor in that, it's BM usually refers to bowel movement. All right? So if you don't know what a bowel movement is, ask your family there. I'm not going to do it. Google it. So he goes in there, puts his beard like this, and he's just like, I'm BM. And so because he had a long beard and a fedora, we're like, hey, you're a Jewish superhero. And so every time he'd be like, I fight for shalom. That was like his catchphrase. And so he got really into it. And then when it came time, it was between him and this other dude who was wearing a sombrero, and he was like Taco Man. All right, and Taco Man didn't even know what to do. All he did was put on a sombrero last minute, but because everybody liked him, they were voting for him. But so Jesse had it was between them two, and Jesse ended up not winning. And all the youth leaders, because the students had to vote, and all the youth leaders Jesse, you were robbed. We loved it. We loved it. We loved it. But Jesse to this day is super salty about it. He's like, oh. So for nerd night at youth, what he did, because he's just one of those guys that loves to cosplay. If it was up to him, this weekend he'd be at Comic-Con with custom-made Halo armor. And he'd be walking around as Master Chief and starting up conversations and shooting people with pretend lasers. That would be my son. So for nerd night, what he did, he had the glasses with the tape, of course. That's you have to have that for nerd night. And he had suspenders, he had a bow tie, he had a plaid shirt tucked in. Well, then he went the extra mile, okay? So he had this backpack. And I was like, Jesse, why are you bringing a backpack? He says, I'm going to pack extra pairs of underwear. I was like, why are you packing extra pairs of underwear into your backpack for a youth group? He says, because, and he got this nerd voice. He's like, because if anybody asks me, I can tell them that mommy packed me extra pairs of underwear in case I have an accident. And then he had this lanyard that said, it's okay if you don't love me because mommy does. And then he had a pocket protector with these pens. He went full on nerd. And that's really fun to see how they get involved. We're going to do an ugly Christmas sweater contest for our youth in December. You can pick a color, this is going to be red night or blue night. You can pick a favorite book for them to dress up as, favorite movie, favorite video game. You can have a backwards night where everybody wears their clothes backwards. You have crazy hair. You have crazy socks. Ironic t-shirt night. I think that would be really fun. Everybody just wear their most ironic t-shirt with the most crazy slogan ever. All right? You can have redneck night. Jesse's beard would have worked for superhero or redneck night. Dual purpose, people. Buy two, get one free. All right. So pick a culture. Maybe you have Mexican night or Japanese night or Brazilian night where everybody shows pictures of their familias. And it's hey, this is my family. I just say that because I love seeing y'all's pictures of the Brazilians or their families. Loved it. But pick a culture. And maybe if you have someone in your youth that's from that culture, like, let them speak on their culture that night or that morning or whenever you're doing this. Like, those are great themes, and those are just a drop in the bucket of things you can do. Those are just things that we've done in the past. Then, what I would also do as a way to keep it fresh on a monthly basis, once a month, switch up the service. So I told you, like, here's how we order our services based on our experiences in terms of maximizing the time. And you may have different ways of doing it, and that's perfectly legitimate. Like, everything I tell you about this stuff is not my way or the highway. I'm just letting you know what's worked for us. So, but you do want to switch up the service every now and again. All right, if you do small groups at the end of service, all right, one Sunday, do it at the beginning. And it really throws them off. And it keeps it fresh. All right, if you always have music playing during your prayer ministry time, do one Sunday without music. I was a guest speaker at summer camp a few years ago, and it was 2 nights. It was kind of like this weekend thing. And so I was speaking 2 nights, and the very first night, I said, all right, they had the band, and they were used to playing during the altar call. Well, I said, okay, we're not going to have any music whatsoever during the altar call. We're just going to sit here in silence, like we're not without a soundtrack, and we're going to teach the kids they don't have to have a soundtrack to experience God. God does not respond to your music; He responds to your faith. Okay, so that's what we were teaching them that night, and we had kids like whose like dads were in jail, some of them sexually abused, like really hard case kids. These are at-risk kids. And like experiencing real deliverance without a soundtrack. All right? Then the very next night, like instead of like teaching and then having altar time, we had one song that we sang the entire service, and we prophesied just using the song and teaching at different times and just flowing with this one song. One song for like 50 minutes. And it was a very holy experience. All right, if 1 or 2 people are always teaching, bring in a guest. All right, if they're like so used to you, like just keep it fresh. The idea is don't let your water get stagnant. Like keep stirring the pot, so to speak. Like keep things moving, keep things fresh, keep things lively. All right, there's a danger with familiarity. This is why so many of us love guest speakers. Because how many of you were like really excited to hear my wife speak? You're like, oh, my wife is speaking, Chris's wife is speaking, and it's going to be wonderful. And it's because maybe some of you got really familiar with my teaching style. Some of you maybe be like, I can't believe I have this class. I hate Chris's teaching style. Can't wait for this class to be over. And that's okay. I'm not offended. I'm not for everybody. I understand that. That's why I bring in my wife, who's wonderful. And it keeps it fresh. All right, that's why we're going to do some different things over the course of these next few weeks. So that we're not just sitting in a chair, doing some different things, keeping it fresh. All right? In Luke, I believe it's chapter 4, starting in verse 24 through 26, it says, then Jesus said, probably you quote me that proverb, physician, heal yourself, meaning, why don't you do miracles here in your hometown like those who did in Capernaum? But I solemnly declare to you that no prophet is accepted in his own hometown. For example, remember how Elijah, the prophet, used a miracle to help the widow of Zarephath, a foreigner from the land of Sidon. There were many Jewish widows needing help in those days of famine, for there had been no rain for 3.5 years, and hunger stalked the land. Yet Elijah was sent to them. Or think of the prophet Elisha, who healed Naaman, a Syrian, rather than the many Jewish lepers needing help. It's because Jesus couldn't perform many miracles in his hometown because they were too familiar with him. Like, oh, that's just the carpenter's son. Oh, man, we knew that dude. He played kickball with us when we were kids. Or like that friend in 5th grade my best friend in 5th grade and I had an accident, years later, he still referred to me as like, oh, yeah, remember when you had that accident? I just became too familiar. And in our churches, a lot of times, we see the cross of Christ, and he becomes so familiar that we can walk by and act like it's no big deal. That's why sometimes I'm just like, let's turn off the music and just sit still. And focus our attention for a moment. Like, Jesus should always be treated with the honor of a guest speaker, so to speak. Where we have that excitement, that anticipation, that expectation. Oh, look, the King is coming. That should be what our services look like. Why do we not have many miracles taking place in our services? It's because we're too familiar with God to have any faith. We become way too familiar. He's just another common thing. He's just another, church is just another thing that we do in our week. It's just another thing to check off the list. And especially when you're working in a church, that checklist mentality becomes a really big temptation. Where you're just like, okay, went to church, check. Jesus should never be one of those things that's just like, okay, Jesus, check. And that's something the Lord's been speaking to me hardcore. In terms of my personal time with him, like I usually had like a 30-minute window that was just me and Jesus time. And I'd be like, okay, check it off my list. And then Jesus was just like, all I am to you is just a check mark? And so I was really impacted by that. So now I'm just like, all right, I'm going to chisel out this time of 2 hours every morning. And Lord, you just do what you want to do. And those have been really holy times. Really holy times. And it keeps it fresh. Not my agenda, but his agenda. All right. So do what you can to keep your ministry fresh. Do what you can to switch things up. Throw people off their game. Give them something that they're not expecting. And I guarantee you're going to see some really rich results. So last 5 minutes, I'm going to rush through this kind of quickly, but this is the last part of this section, so that way we can move on to the next topic, next class. So parties and or field trips, those are things you can do quarterly. So we talked about weekly things, how you would order your services, monthly things, things you can do, theme days, switching up your services. Quarterly, what do you do? Quarterly or even once a year. All right, we had a preteen party that we called Ready Player 2, and it was a video game theme. You guys are familiar with the movie Ready Player 1? Anybody? I like that movie a lot, personally. So what we did, we're like Ready Player 2. So if we kind of did this whole Mario thing where if Jesus is player 1, we are his player 2. And we actually broke down practical atheism of trying to follow our own agenda and push ahead of God. And we used video games as a way to break down practical atheism in our lives. All right, we did our Japanese thing. We did an Olympics thing. And we had this one guy, and we called him Willy Nilly. And we made hometown videos. And basically, we were from someplace in Arkansas, and I was Mayor Cletus Copperbottom, and Christina was Amelia, and we had a daughter Hopi Copperbottom, and we had and the Olympics were hey, we had this big venue that we're not doing it. We're like, hey, come and do an Olympics in our small town, and willy-nilly can perform in the Olympics. And then we did hometown videos of his youth pastor being excited about willy-nilly in the Olympics, and his parents being excited about willy-nilly in the Olympics. And it was super goofy and super fun. We did a glow-in-the-dark party where we played lightsaber ninja. We had glow-in-the-dark snacks. We did a medieval party where I was centered around a character named Lord Brundlewood from the Great Shire. We had Hawaiian night where we had an Indian guy. Anybody know Nathan George? Anybody? Okay. So he lives on campus. That's why I asked, but he was probably before your time. So We called him President Monkey Bananas, and he was in charge of the Hawaiian smoothie shop. He was like, "Hello, my name is President Monkey Bananas. Would you like a smoothie?" And then we had coconut bowling, and one time we had a movie theater party with snacks, and we had on the outside of the door we set up this marquee of the movie we were going to watch. And I'm not personally a fan of the movie God's Not Dead, but we showed that movie because that's something I think Christian parents would have been on board with, and we had some good discussion time as a result of the movie. We had different game nights and different. You can do summer camps, lock-ins. These all are things that let your creativity go wild. With the last 2 minutes, I want to tell you, kind of the but behind this. All of these require a minimum of 4 months of planning, usually more. All right, so that's why we're these are maybe once every 4 months, maybe twice a year, or even once a year. That way, you have the commitment of the whole church, because you want the whole ministry to get involved, or it's going to flop. I promise you. All right, you don't want just your individual team involved in it. All right, you're going to need sponsors. You're going to need a bigger volunteer base. You're going to need security. You're going to need paperwork. You're going to need parents to buy into it. All right, building excitement with the kids. You need promotion. You need social media. You need a budget. All right, you need supplies. That's why all of this stuff takes 6 months of planning. KFN takes a year of planning. YFN takes a year of planning. Spanish YFN, a whole year. Because there's a lot of nuanced things that take place in that planning process that you can't do in a month. You just can't do it. If it's better to not do something than to do something sloppy, because they may not remember, the thing that you didn't do, but they will remember the thing that went bad. And that will be like a stain on their mind. So whatever you do it with excellence. Excellence, people. That's why I don't like God's Not Dead. Excellence, people.
It's better than some other Christian movies.
Oh, that is true. But, so whatever and think of excellence as your form of worship. People ask me all the time, Chris, what is the way that you worship God? And I don't say singing, I don't say dancing, I don't say waving my flag. I tell them the way that I worship Lord is by doing everything as unto Him.
Amen.
Everything that I do, I'm asking, Lord, does this honor you? Am I giving you my absolute best? Because I believe, just like in the Old Testament, there was a precedent for giving their best gift to God. Not this mangy, disabled little goat. No, it had to be the best. So your worship, whenever you're doing ministry, should always be your absolute best. All right? If it's too ethereal for you to think about doing it as unto the Lord, think about what you would do if you were going to the White House and you had to provide a presentation to the President of the United States. What type of presentation would you give? Would you throw something sloppy together? No. You're going to think really hard. How do I make this excellent? Well, if the President of the United States gets that type of honor, God deserves even more. That's why sloppiness in church should not be tolerated. That is not worship, people. Sloppiness is not worship. Excellence, not performance. There's a difference between excellence and performance. Excellence is giving our best. Performance is look at me, look at me, look at me. Don't tolerate sloppiness. Don't tolerate it. Cool. Well, we finished up this topic. Thursday, we're going to talk about games and snacks, and I'm going to bring in some stuff, and we're going to get kind of a little bit rowdy in here, just because I want you guys to experience what it would look like to do preteen ministry stuff. Okay, so see you Thursday. Bring your masks.